already been paid. Yes, I'm saying it again. Reparations for slavery have already been paid. According to Robert Wesley of Tulane University, when the British abolished slavery in their colonies in 1833, Parliament used tax collections to compensate the losses of remaining slave holders. You heard me right. Slaveholders received reparations. The Africans who were made slaves received absolutely no compensation from the British under this act. French Royal Ordinance of 1825 required massive indemnity payments to be paid to slaveholders who lost slaves as a result of the Haitian War of Independence. Check this out. Formerly enslaved Africans were forced to pay indemnity payments, and Haiti didn't finish paying that debt of 150 million francs until 1947. When the Dutch abolished slavery in 1863, the Dutch slaveholders were also compensated for loss of slaves. Yes, reparations was paid to the Dutch. According to a book by Miss Catherine Frank entitled Repair, Redeeming the Promise of Abolition, she writes, in America during the Civil War, when enslaved recruits were needed in the Union Army in the border state of Kentucky, which happened to be not only a loyalist but also a slave-owning state, the slaveholders in Kentucky were compensated by the War Department. In the District of Columbia, U.S. Congress passed legislation specifically for the benefit of slaveholders who lost slaves as a result of the 13th Amendment being signed. And the 13th Amendment is what abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime. I'm Professor Karriemah Lotus, and this is BBI Talks. On part 2 of our Green Gold series, we welcome a wonderful scholar and professor, Brother Reginald Muhammad, as we discuss a case for reparations.
Oh, hear me now.
Professor Reginald Muhammad was born in Tallahassee, Florida, and grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida. He is a political and behavioral scientist at National Reparations Institute and Summit Incorporated here in Atlanta, Georgia, and a veteran member of the mighty Nation of Islam. He is the author of the book entitled In Fear of Leading, and his work is featured in books such as No Crystal Stairs and Life and Day in Black LA. His hard-hitting Black political point editorials have been featured online and in national and local newspapers. He has actively worked in the reparations movement for well over 28 years. He has published his master's thesis entitled The Movement to Secure Reparations for Blacks in America, an analysis of fragmented models and methodologies. And he is currently a doctoral student of political science with a concentration in international relations. Yes, y'all, we have a heavyweight with us today who can actually speak intelligently about reparations. So let's get it in. Professor Reginald Muhammad, how are you, brother?
Assalamu alaikum, Professor.
Well,
Karriemah,
alaikum salam, sir.
We can
yes,
hear me
we
now?
can hear you.
Good, good.
Yeah.
I want to assure your audience, even though my technical challenges, it was not on mute. Okay, early on. So we're grateful and thank you. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness, regardless of land, language, or location. There is but one God, and I bear witness to all of the prophets. I greet all of you all with the greeting words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. For others on the call,
Walaikum salam, sir.
Abari Ghani, Hotep, free to land. How you all? And
We're doing well. We just need to speak a little louder because we got Instagram here and they can hear you.
And thank you so much for having me. And I thank your audience for your patience. And I thank you for that introduction. But at the end of the day, Sister Professor Karriemah, I'm hopefully a student working hard to become a better student in the work that we're doing day in and day out. Thank you again for having me and here to talk about our case and our demand for reparations.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now let's talk about it, okay? Because you've done quite a bit of extensive research on reparations. There's been so many conversations. We've had House Judiciary Subcommittee meetings about reparations. Actually, to even, I think it's House Resolution 40, which is just to study, right? Just to study reparations, and we're having some backlash. Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah, HR 40 was implemented back in 1989 by former John Conyers, the late congressman out of Michigan. And it was then a study bill to study reparations. Well, Sheila Jackson Lee in the last couple of years, she's added another component. Not only is to study reparations, but to actually form a committee to look at reparations and how it could possibly be implemented, or what's the viability of the whole reparations movement, and again, can it and how it should be implemented, and again, forming a commission to actually look into reparations from that vantage point. I think it is a good start, but at the end of the day, I warn Black people and my students all of the time is that one of the things that I know about as a political scientist, that I know about the white ruling class in Congress, they will tell you they will study something, and that's just a way of tying it up for years, allowing the public to forget about it and not actually doing anything. So you have politicians now from Biden and all of them saying, "Oh yeah, I'm for study of reparations." Well, but most of them have a history of working and talking against Black reparations. And now it has become politically expedient. It has become politically expedient. They're saying, well, we'll study reparations because they know in the back of their mind, yeah, we'll study it, but we're not going to ever allow it to come into a full committee and it be voted on the House and the Senate floor. I don't trust them to do that. But I want to tell your audience here today, we do have a process and a way that we can actually secure reparations. And I want to share that with them later. But that is a start. And a lot of the Black organizations, we applaud that. And a lot of Black organizations are saying, well, you know, we in support of the Sheila Jackson Lee bill, HR 40. Yeah, I'm in support of the study. But at the end of the day, I know how the bureaucracy works in Washington to a degree. And again, that is a stall tactic, especially set by segments of the white ruling class, whether you call them liberal or conservative. They're saying, okay, yeah, we for the study, but they're not really for the implementation, and it becomes public policy at some point, reparations for Blacks in America.
So what do you feel is really propelling this conversation? I mean, I know you're saying political expediency, but what specifically is causing this new wave of interest in reparations?
Well, you see the national movement, you see the injustice going on all over the country. And so finally, Black people realize since President Obama has left office, we're not under many of us are not under the illusion of inclusion politically, economically, socially, educationally, and culturally in America. So, and with the wave of violence, we know it's always been there, but the wave of violence, and because social media now is driving us to take a look at race, they're white liberals and the segments of the Black petty bourgeoisie, they're willing to look at reparations now and at least talk about it. But in many instances, I warn our people, let's not get caught up into the social symbolic aspect of it. Let's talk about the substance here. And again, them saying that we're gonna study reparations, we'll talk about it. That's social symbolic. Until it becomes, they start forming public policy, it will never happen. No matter how much LeBron James wear on his jersey, Black Lives Matter, That's social symbolic.
Right.
No matter how many marches that we have, that's social symbolic. And now I'm not saying that that does not that does bring attention to the call to the issue and the cause that we have. But again, at the end of the day, we got to have Black practitioners, female and male, on the ground to develop and shaping public policy so reparations becomes a reality. And if it doesn't happen that way, Professor Karriemah, we'll be here 20 years from now talking reparations. And Black people have been the longest running victims who have talked reparations than longer than anybody in the country. And America will pay reparations under the right circumstances.
So let's talk about that. First and foremost, within the plan that you are developing, there's something very unique about your approach. Would you share with the audience what makes what you are proposing unique in terms of the overall dialogue of reparations?
Yes, what I have discovered in my years of study on reparations, what I discovered, one reason why Blacks have not been seriously taken and have not gotten reparations and have not been seriously considered for reparations is that, number one, the white ruling class understands how fragmented Blacks are about reparations.
Right.
It's only been in the last, what I call the Million Man March era, the last 25 years, we've talked about reparations. Remember in 1995, 25 years ago, if you go back and look at the official document from the Million Man March, it raises the question of reparations. And then by 2000, the first book to hit New York Times on reparations written by a Black person was The Debt by Randall Robinson. That's the first book.
Yes,
that's 2000.
Excellent.
That's 5 years after the Million Man March. Then in Durban, South Africa, in 2001, for the first time, they declared that slavery was a crime against humanity. That was at the International Conference on Racism. Well, there was a delegation of Blacks that from the United States, probably a couple hundred of them, went to Durban, South Africa, and they forced it to be part of the platform and the declaration that slavery was a crime against humanity and Blacks were due reparations. Now that helped propel and get the argument back on the table. Then in 2015, after 2011, you didn't really hear much about reparations at that time. And in fact, there are Black people even today saying and suggesting that reparations is a very extreme, that's a very militant, extreme approach. We'll never get reparations. You have heard all of that. Then in 2015, Ta-Nehisi Coates in The Atlantic wrote an article on the case for reparations. That brought it back in the national spotlight. That opened up the dialogue for it also. But now, let's back up 10 years ago. I was doing graduate work at Clark Atlanta University, working on a master's, and the title of which you announced earlier was the Movement to Secure Reparations for Blacks in America, an analysis of fragmented models and methodologies. Well, my argument then was, and after I looked at Black compared to the major reparations organizations, the leaders in the movement, and I was asking, I kept asking the question, why is it that Blacks have not been seriously taken about reparations? Why have we not been seriously taken and it be politically put on the forefront and on the burner to finally getting Black people reparations? Well, after I looked at it, Professor Karriemah, is that they knew that Blacks were the Black bourgeoisie, Black educators. Many of them were even afraid to even mention reparations because it seemed so extreme, and it was a militant, or their concern, it's a militant cause. Well, number two is that we were not controlling the narrative. We were fragmented. And then two, there was a missing, what I discovered in all of the literature, the thousands of pages and the books that I've read on reparations and the essays, all of the articles, is that there was no model and methodology for actually securing it. So we can talk about it, but how is it that you're going to go about doing it and make it happen? And so what I discovered, that there was a missing methodology. And I still submit to you and your audience today, if we don't have a methodology for doing it, a model and a methodology for doing it, we'll be around in 20 years. And my Sakina and Sabra, my daughters, they'll be grown and still talking reparations. and when we could have settled the issue and had reparations, but it's based on a model and a methodology. And so before they allowed me to do finish my master's, I had to come up with a model and a methodology for securing reparations. And this is not something I just thought of two months ago, a year ago, but it's been an ongoing piece. And any of you all can go online and find that thesis. And I described what I call the collective culture model to secure reparations for Blacks in America. And
now, for those who
the model and the methodology.
Oh, pardon me.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, brother, and I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to know, for those who are not in academia, what do you mean specifically? Like, what is an example when you're saying methods and methodologies in reparation?
Okay. Well, in order to finally get something, get a bill passed, especially something as major as this, there's I'm gonna give you an example. The Japanese got reparations here in America. The Jews have gotten reparations in America. Some of the native tribes have gotten reparations in America. So America does pay reparations. Now with the Jews and with the Japanese, they all had what we call the that would have been the legislative model. Well, what they decided that they would lobby legislators. They would bring national attention to their cause. They would lobby legislators, pay for lobbyists, and have that push among legislators. So they didn't go to court to get reparations. Blacks have made that mistake, attempting to sue multinational corporations and others for reparations. What the Japanese and the Jews did not do that. What they did was they actually, what I call the legislative model, they engaged legislators throughout the country, both the House and the Senate, and then at some point in a think tank, they drafted what the legislation should look like that they had the Senate and the House vote on, and then ultimately the president had to sign off on it, and that's how they were able to get reparations. We have never done that. We have never lobbied. Well, I won't say we have never lobbied because we're lobbying now, but we're without any money. We're lobbying and to create the legislation for us. Most legislation comes from think tanks and policy centers where they do research and write and research and publish what the legislation should look like. And so I suggest to you and your audience is that the reparations that came about with the Japanese, that was not written by a particular legislator. That the research was done. They spelled out the who, what, when, where, and why. And in law, you always look at the issue, the rule of law, the action and engine. That's what they did with reparations legislation, and that's how they were able to get that passed. Only thing we have done is had conferences on reparations. We had speeches on reparations. We marched on reparations. We picketed about reparations. But again, where is your model and the methodology for doing? And and honestly, that's our job to facilitate some of that. Since we've been critical of the movement, that's part of our job is to we draft legislation that ultimately will become legislation for reparations. Because the other thing, Professor Karriemah, we cannot ask our enemy to draft something and then we think it's reparations. Because one of the things that's happening around the country, you see different states, and you and I talked about this earlier, and cities talking, they're about to implement a reparations policy. Well, I suggest to you, and other scholars have suggested, that's not reparations.
That's right.
Government at the federal level, local government at the federal level, state and local level, they are to provide goods and services and a level of protection for the people. So now here it is in 2020, we got cities, North Carolina, we got cities in Illinois, we got the state of California talking reparations, and they're saying, well, we're going to set aside money for blacks who can prove that they're descendants of slaves. Well, I'm suggesting to you, only thing they're doing is rerouting taxpayers' money. It's not reparations.
Right.
Government
not only rerouting
goods and services. That's not reparations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And not only rerouting taxpayers' dollars, in the case of Evanston, Illinois, their local government had actually put in to pass as a form of reparations. I call it fake reparations, that they want to take taxes from legalized marijuana and reroute that pool of funding into community-based programs that benefit the Black community. That's not reparations. That you know, if you're going to have policy that helps those who are low income in the community or what have you, then that's what it is. But it's not reparations. Likewise, in California right now, they're petitioning to have California acknowledge that they too need to pay reparations to those who were enslaved in the state of California, and the fact that California benefited financially and otherwise from slavery. And so that's what's on the agenda as we speak, that's being discussed. Now, how does that, does it have any bearing on what's happening federally when we have states that are now being pursued for reparations? Does that change the conversation on a federal level?
You were kind of breaking up, but I think I heard most of your question. What the states are doing and what cities are doing, it does keep the reparations conversation alive. But at the national level, if we got complete reparations, Sister Karriemah, is that what you'll see finally is the restoration and the transformation of the masses of our people, economically, educationally, politically, socially, and culturally. Because reparations, remember about, and I should have said this early on, reparations is about repairing the damage that has been done to a people. Never in the history, for those on the call for the first time, never were people robbed of their names, their language, their land, their culture, and their God, and then brought 9,000 miles away. And then after the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, then finally we receive it in 1865, and they say you're free. Free to do what and free to go where? And remember now, what's significant about slavery as far as Black people in America, again, names, our language, our land, our culture, and our God. But people have been so traumatized, terrorized, tortured, and tormented for centuries. After the Emancipation Proclamation, they said you were free. Free to do what and free to go where? The family structure is destroyed. You release those who are penniless, landless, and then there's a level of ignorance and poverty that had never been seen among our people. That has never happened to anybody anywhere in the annals of history, recorded history. So this is what makes it so unique. And then remember, reparations is about repairing the damage. There's some internal damage that has been done, what we say psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually has been done. Then there's the physical damage that has been done. And with the physical damage that is being done, we're looking at the national level, again, now to control the narrative and spell out what reparations look like. Because if we don't do it that way, they'll say, you know what, we gave y'all reparations 10 years from now, and say, why are you Negroes still arguing and hollering for jobs and justice? We already gave you reparations. Well, I'm suggesting to you and your audience, what you're seeing around the country, that's not. And if it is somewhat can be considered reparations, then it's only a partial reparation. But we are talking about a complete reparations, and that's spelled out with the collective culture model. But it will address the number one, helping restore the Black family. Number two, dealing with the land question. And remember, the minister said, if we're not talking about millions of acres of land they owe us, then all of it is a compromise and it's a sellout. So the land question becomes key and critical. And so we're talking about at least 8 to 10 states, 8 to 10 states, and we're millions of acres, over 100 million acres of land, because that is part of the reparations package that we're pushing, and that we can actually achieve with some unity and having and implementing the correct model and the methodology for doing that. But it's wonderful that you made that in cities and in states.
It's wonderful that you made that connection, Professor Reginald, because it's great that you made this connection or this bridge between reparations and the discussion regarding separation. And one great champion that we have that's been hosting a series of town hall meetings on that particular topic is Dr. Student Minister Ava Muhammad. And so for those of you who are joining us on YouTube and Facebook, as well as Instagram, thank you for joining. If you haven't had a chance to watch Dr. Student Minister Ava Muhammad on the Separation Tour, please, by all means, pull it up on YouTube and all of the social media platforms that it is available. Because when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about, like you said, the minister said, millions of acres in order to even approach the conversation about reparations. I want to take a quick turn to this House Judiciary Subcommittee, because there were a couple of things. Obviously, Mr. Coates that you mentioned earlier was one of those panelists. Brother Danny Glover, the actor, was on there, and many others. But there were a few things that were highlighted as points of a counter to what we're talking about. And that is, number one, how do we give or provide reparations to those who are no longer among us, where the victims are no longer physically present, if you're saying that the victims are only those who were enslaved? That was one of the points that was brought out of that conversation. I wanted to, and I'm going to take it point by point, and I just want you to speak to it based upon your research, dear brother.
Well, that's one of the arguments that you will hear whites use, and some blacks say, well, that happened so long ago that that's not even relevant, and you can't prove the descendants. And one of the things, Professor Karriemah and audience, is that they make the argument slavery happened so long ago, the records are missing, we can't conclusively say that you were related to that person and that person. How can we even prove that Black people, you are the descendants of those people at that point in time? What state, what city? Well, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, the suppression of the African slave trade, the documents that they're saying that are missing, it's in a book called The Suppression of the African Slave Trade. And in fact, that's part of his doctoral dissertation at Harvard University. So we have the records. And then with the DNA today, we can trace that back and DNA and show conclusively, we're talking about 75 to 80% of Blacks in America, we show conclusively that they're descendants of those original people that were snatched from Africa, and we know in 1555 and that are still here today. With the DNA technology, we can definitely show conclusively there is a link. Well, the other argument is that, well, I did not have anything to do with it. We didn't own any slaves. We just came to America. Right. But they are the beneficiaries of it, of the crime against Black people. So that's no excuse to say that all of a sudden now America can't pay because the descendants are dead now. But we know we're the descendants, and we can prove it with the documentation that's still there and with the DNA, who we are and where we came from. So at the end of the day, we will not allow them to change the rule, because when you're talking about a crime against humanity, the murder of our people, and a conservative estimate is that we lost over 50 million. The highest estimate is over 100 million people, and it's a human rights crime. There is no statute or limitation on that for murder of our people. And at the end of the day, we will push that. And again, because of the legislative body, it's not the tort model. The tort model would say you would go to court, and the court would says, well, the evidence, it happened so long ago, the statute of limitation is out. That's why we're not pursuing the tort model. That's how they have undermined the white segments of the white ruling class, the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. There was within the list, there are Blacks who have attempted to sue for reparations. But when they get to court, what happens is that because of the witnesses are gone, because of the lack of evidence and everything else, and then a statute of limitation, they have been dismissed. But the U.S. government, the Senate and the House, they can create and develop anything that they want in the way of legislation. And if you got the support of it and enough money behind it, it can become a reality. Hopefully, did
Awesome.
I kind of answer your question? Okay.
Yes, you did. And as a matter of fact, it leads to the next point. And there are some other organizations that are also providing their expression of what reparations should look like. However, some of their conversation to me appears to be a bit divisive because they're saying they're basing their form of reparations in terms of those who should be the beneficiaries of reparations to be exclusive to Blacks born here in America at the exclusion of, say, those who may be from the Caribbean. Can you maybe speak to that aspect of reparations in terms of who the beneficiaries should be defined as?
Yes, but let me add this to what you're saying. There are a good, we'll say 10 organizations that are pushing reparations. The whole reparation movement is fragmented, and I'm a longtime Cobra, and we don't hide anything about that. Of course, longtime member of the Nation of Islam. There within the reparations movement, it is fragmented because we got different philosophies, we got different theologies, we got different classes. All of this. This is one reason why we have not been taken seriously in the reparations movement because the movement is scattered. I'm going to give you an example.
Right.
This summer we had a national reparations summit, which our organization, the National Reparations Institute, built a summit. Well, everybody was invited to the summit, but there were those who didn't want to come to the summit because prior to then there was a national conference that one of the other major organizations had. This is how petty and silly we are sometimes in the reparations movement. And so the white ruling class knows that the movement is fragmented. But that's our job on this end here at the National Reparations Institute and the National Reparations Summit is to consolidate the movement because in our unity is our strength. And but now there is a major organization who has come to the forefront in the last few years here in America. They have helped create some of the division. But then we go and look at some of that is white support, some of that is white liberals' money and conservative money, and they're pushing what you talked about. Well, saying, well, if you are not born here in America, and you can't prove if you were born, you're from the continent, you're from the Caribbean, you're not entitled to reparations. Now think about that. When the Jewish people who've gotten reparations, they didn't ask where were your descendants, where they were from. Only thing that we said that they were victims of the Holocaust, and so they got reparations. And so the problem with us here again, we've been so divided, and we have been socially inundated with European culture and behavior here. We come with that whole that individual thing, and then I'm not so sure that some of this is not government plan because how you I'm gonna give you an example. One of the leading reparations organizations now, they have gone after Black leadership who have been on the ground for reparations for decades.
Wow.
You'll hear their conversation. It's like burning the bridge that brought you over. Does the bridge need repair? Do we need to amend parts of it?
Yes.
Do we need to tighten it up? Yes. But how do you start to disparage Dr. Ray Winbush, who's been in the forefront of the reparations movement? How you talk about Mama Marimba Ani, who's been in the forefront of the reparations, Dr. Omar Obadele, Minister Farrakhan, who have been in the forefront of the reparations movement, and you come out taking cheap shots at them and saying, now we going to Congress for reparations. See, either some of that is an agent provocateur in the government because they see there is momentum building for reparations. They see that our youth are out there now, and they need to, our youth are now even talking reparations. Now, that's one of the major missing components in the reparations movement today is our students and our youth. And if we don't do that aspect and make sure that's developed, then we're not going anywhere as far as reparations. Because at the end of the day, all successful political movements that we have been involved in have had a youth and student component. You look at the civil rights movement, you look at the Black nationalist era, you look at the struggle in the Zambia that they call South Africa today. Those were youth and students that were involved that made that movement happen. You look in the Caribbean, any of the movements that we have been successful with is because we've had a student youth component. And that's one of the things, that's one of the major missing variables here in the reparations movement. But we're doing what we can to make sure that we offset that and bring our students and our youth into harmony with what we're doing and what needs to happen as it relates to reparations.
Absolutely, I agree 1,000%. For those of you who are watching, I thank you so much for joining BBI Talks. We are here with Professor Reginald Muhammad, and we are discussing a case for reparations. If you have any questions for Professor Muhammad, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, or whether or not you are on Facebook or Instagram. Hey, Instagram fam, please feel free to drop your questions there in the comment section, and I will ask Professor Muhammad your question. We'll go from there. So let's take another turn. Excuse me.
Okay.
You know, when we talk about reparations, there's an emotional component. Okay. And even though I am not one who is about trying to convince someone to have a moral compass,
Okay.
you either do or you don't. But when we're talking about the emotionalism of reparations, we find that there are, although there may be few, but there are Black Americans who are not in support of reparations, just as there are white Americans who are not in support of it. But the Black Americans that are not in support, some may feel that way because of a deep sense of grief and shame over slavery and what happened during slavery.
Exactly.
And the reverberating effects of slavery on our families, as you talked about earlier today. And then there's something else that is also circulating in this landscape of discussion about reparations that I'd love for you to speak to. And that is the whole concept of epigenetics, when we're talking about trauma being passed down genetically from one generation to the next. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, thank you. And very good question. What I generally find in my nearly 30 years of being in the movement for reparations, Blacks who generally don't support reparations generally are for two reasons: their lack of knowledge about reparations, or their fear of the response of the white ruling class, or whites in general. Now, what do I mean that? And I don't want to sound say that carelessly, but let's look at the fear of Blacks. Think about, there are Congress people right now who have voted for reparations. There are Blacks who have been in Congress for 20 and 30 years, and they have voted for reparations for whites and others. But when it comes to Blacks, they will not dare go near supporting H.R. 40. Right now, with the Congressional Black Caucus, there's still a portion of them who are not on board for reparations and who will not advocate for reparations. Let's look at it at former President Barack Obama said that he thought, and I'm paraphrasing, he thought the reparations was too divisive and there were other things that we could do to help develop the problems that Blacks are having in America. And of course, he pushed the affordable health care. Now, the problem with that is that President Obama, before he leaves office, the last piece of legislation that was signed was reparations that he did in 2016. Congress and the Senate passed a bill that dealt with the remaining Holocaust survivors. They said remaining Holocaust survivors that were below the poverty level in the United States needed assistance. And what did they do? Joe Biden, President Obama, the House and the Senate passed legislation, which was a reparations bill, and gave them, the remaining Holocaust survivors that they say were below the poverty level in the United States, gave them $12 million. And Biden says he'd be damned if he take responsibility for what his ancestors did hundreds of years ago in America. And
wow,
the end of the reparations bill passed in 2016 before President Obama left office. So Blacks are in support of reparations. They're just not in support of reparations for Black people. and because of the disdain, the disrespect, the lack of appreciation and gratitude for what blacks have contributed in this country. And let me say this to Professor Karriemah. Why is slavery so important? And there are times when I'm speaking to audiences, and sometimes my first year students, they're, Professor Muhammad, why do I always talk about slavery? Why is, that happened so long ago, we beyond all of that. But here's why slavery is so important, Professor Karriemah. There's no world economy until black bodies start to be snatched and dispersed throughout the world. You get the banking institution as a result of slavery. Insurance, shipbuilding, and the Industrial Revolution takes off as a result of free black labor. They worked out people for 310 years with no pay. So slavery is very important. Read the book Capitalism and Slavery by Dr. Eric Williams. Read How Europe Under the Developed Africa by Dr. Walter Rodney. These are major pieces that you don't have the insurance industry or the banking. The Lloyds of London banks, the Barclay banks, Alexander and Dave Barclay. These banks happen as a result of them owning slaves and reaping huge profits. And remember, the minister talked about cotton being king in the United States. We not only cotton, tobacco, and sugar cane. These are major products that black people produce in America for centuries with no pay. And so this is how America became the superpower that it is today, is because at the end of the day, you work millions of our people for no pay. And so that becomes very key and critical why we push and we still talk about and we still have to remind our people why slavery was important in the country. And for whites who don't actually, the documentation is there and we utilize that documentation. Now, let's fast forward. People say, well, that happened so long ago. Well, there are other reasons why we're pushing for slavery. We know that Jim Crow and segregation. We know that black people were, after the Emancipation Proclamation, they were supposed to get 40 acres and a mule. That never happened. General Sherman did sign and set up the Freedmen's Bank in the United States that was supposed to address black people coming out of slavery to give them land and 40 acres and a mule each family. That never happened, because had that happened, people would have been certainly in a better economic, put on a better economic footing today had that happened. And now Bob Johnson, the former BET executive, said that it would take $14.1 trillion to close the wealth gap for blacks in America. So it's not about black people just working hard. There has to be some systems in place. This is why we're pushing reparations. There has to be some systems in place that will close the wealth gap. If black people worked 100, we employed every black person for the next 40, 50 years, and everybody was employed, we still would not close the wealth gap in America, what whites have compared to what blacks have, what blacks don't have.
Now, I want to
did I
profound.
Answer some of the
no,
questions?
it's profound what you're sharing. Definitely, dear brother. I just want to also share some questions that we have coming in.
Okay.
Brother Lee Anthony had asked the question: is 12 to 15 states, is that too much in terms of the amount of land that
I didn't hear the question. I didn't hear the question.
12.
Repeat the question, please. 12
to 15 states. Is that considered to be too much when you're talking about what it is that we are incorporating into this reparations proposal? Do you think realistically that America is going to give blacks that amount of land? Is that realistic? Regardless of whether or not we are deserving or not, is that something that once asked for, that they will in fact give?
Exactly. Well, Sister Karriemah, that is a very, very good question, because time is that good. You present the package to segments of the white ruling class, they're not going to give you all reparations, and you will never get reparations. I've heard you will never get reparations in America. Well, different take on it, and let me tell you why. What I've learned, though, Sister Karriemah, and to the audience and Brother Anthony, what I've learned as a political scientist, that generally all of their political and economic decisions are based on four variables or four components. Will it enhance or ill affect their power base, their profit base, their policy base, and their privilege base? Let me say that again. All of their political and economic decisions are based generally on four components or four variables. Will it enhance or ill affect, number one, their power base, number two, their profit base, number three, their policy base, and number four, their privilege base? That's how they make decisions. Reparations is going to be a political decision. And so prove that, Muhammad, that you think that they make all of their decisions based on that. Professor,
go ahead and prove it.
Karriemah,
prove
Brother
it,
Anthony.
Professor, prove it.
It's Anthony. Is that Brother Anthony? Let me prove this, because at the end of the day, you saw them move $2 trillion in 2 weeks for the first stimulus package, and they're going to approve one more stimulus package. It might be over $2 trillion. It's not going to take them 20 years to move trillions of dollars. And the reason why they moved those $2 trillion, my sister, and to the audience, is because it was starting to ill affect their profit base. The bankers on Wall Street, the multinational corporations say, we got to have money in the economy. It's not going to be based on you marching. It's not going to be based on us praying and asking them to be human, just, fair, and equitable. It's not based on that. They do that. They move trillions of dollars all of the time. And it's, again, right. It's not based on you appealing to their humanity, us appealing to their humanity. That's how they will make the decision about reparations. Let me give your audience, because one of the professors at Morehouse challenged me on this and says, well, I don't know about your philosophy or your theory called the quadruple base theory. Again, it's based on, will it enhance or ill affect your power base, your profit base, your policy base, and your privilege base? Do you remember in 2017, Trump comes into office in 2017, the longest government shutdown in U.S. history? There are black people who were panicking, saying, man, this man is a fool. People are going to lose their house. They're going to lose their livelihoods. They're going to lose their families. And this shutdown has got to end. Donald Trump is saying, I'm going to get the money for the border, for my wall, regardless of what's happening in the economy. Right. You all going to give me the money for the border wall. So I looked at that, Professor Karriemah. I looked at that and said, well, let's test the theory now. So I'm down in Florida speaking, and someone says, well, what about this theory that you got out there about the white ruling class and how they make political and economic decisions? I said, okay, well, right now there's a shutdown. I stepped back in a couple of days. Allah blessed us to look at it and analyze it. And I said, wait a minute, this shutdown is not going to last no more than, I'll say, give it another 5 to 7 days. And we were weeks out from this, and I was on social media, and I said this. I said, no, this shutdown is not going to last longer. Trump says on a Thursday, well, American people better figure out other ways of making money, apply for different jobs and all of that, and they better hunker down because this shutdown until I get the money for the border wall. Well, I said no, because here's what was happening, audience. We were a month out from the Super Bowl. A month out from the Super Bowl. And guess where the Super Bowl was? In Atlanta.
Sure was.
The largest airport in the world, the largest airport in the world, a business airport in the world, in Atlanta. We're a month out from the Super Bowl. Well, I know that there's a white ruling class. I know that Donald Trump does not make all of the political and economic decisions. So even though he says that on a Thursday that we better get ready to sustain ourselves over a long period of time for the shutdown, he says that on a Thursday, but on a Monday, he walks his behind out on the White House lawn and said that the shutdown was over with. Well, I knew it was going to be over with, because at the end of the day, I knew that there were half of the NFL owners are Jewish. I know that there's a multi-billion-dollar operation. I know that the biggest commercial day worldwide is the Super Bowl. And that's how I based it on, because all of their political and economic decisions. And so even though that they said that it was going to, Trump said he was going to get the money for the border wall, but there's a segment of the white ruling class that said, look here, you're about to mess up. We're a month out from the Super Bowl. We're canceling flights all over the country. 3 airports have been ill-affected by this already. And now it's starting to affect the economy. Take your behind out there and tell the people that the shutdown is over. And that's exactly what he did. The quadruple base philosophy. They make all of their political decisions based on, and that's how they would make their decisions based on reparations. That's how we tied that in. Because I'm going to give you an example. Recently, the NFL and all the sports teams started to say, well, wait a minute. Black people are getting killed on the streets. It's starting to affect our players. The players don't want to play. They're talking about canceling games. So what do? They bring in the players and they bring in black voices and said, well, what can we do to get y'all back on the court? What can we do to make y'all happy? And so in a very social symbolic way, they allowed you to put the names on the jersey. They said that they're going to sing the national black anthem. That's social symbolic. Where's the substance here? At the end of the day, this is about public policy. Show me, and so this is where we have to be about making sure that we consolidate the movement and push our people toward the policy that will get us reparations. And again, you saw that the NFL, the NBA, and the National Baseball League was starting to be affected financially. That's part of what we call the privilege base. Athletics and entertainment is a huge market. That's part of the privilege base in America, that the white ruling class, they make their decisions based on that. And they made their decision based on the NFL, believe it or not. They were not going to allow Donald Trump to continue to cancel flights and stock shareholders be ill-affected around the country, and then to mess up the largest commercial day in the world, the Super Bowl, where they paid, what, $3 or $4 million for 1 30-second ad? Come on now. They wouldn't even allow, and I called it weeks before it happened, and there was nothing, there ain't no special gift I got. It was just that at the end of the day, as a student of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Minister Farrakhan, is that I looked at this critically and said that, okay, their profit base will be ill-affected here. And then their power bases will start to be ill-affected. So they had to call Trump and tell him, look here, go back out there and tell the people that the shutdown is over with.
And I saw something very similar.
Go off on the rail. And
No. We appreciate that. We appreciate that. And it reminded me of the same type of scenario taking place with the NBA, except they told the players, these are the pre-approved messages that you can put on your jerseys to highlight that Black Lives Matter. But Black Lives only matter in the pre-approved statements that we allow you to wear. So we're still $1 million slaves. But okay, so I want to also touch on something else that relates to reparations and the legal conversation of reparations, and that is precedent. You must have in this case a legal precedent in order to be able to even consider being awarded, right, or being compensated.
Yes.
Now we've heard of Dred Scott. And obviously he was not successful in his legal battle, right? But there were others before him. Matter of fact, there was a book that was turned into a film, 12 Years a Slave, that was chronicling Brother Solomon Northup. And even after all of what he went through, and he started out a free man and went before the courts and still lost. But there is a woman that you mentioned earlier that did win her case. And I did some research since the last time we spoke, but I wanted you to please take center stage in talking about who that person was. And then I would love to share some of the things that I found out. So who was it that actually won a legal battle to secure reparations as a former slave?
Be honest with you, Sister Karriemah, I don't have my notes in front of me, but it's Henrietta, what is her name? But she was a slave for 25 years. I forget her name in a minute, and I don't have my notes in front of me. But
Henrietta Woods, slave, the Black woman she is.
Absolutely, Henrietta Woods. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
but she was a slave for 25 years. and she was taken into the state of Ohio, and and got her freedom. Well, lo and behold, she was snatched by slave catchers, the police at that time, and taken back to the South and re-enslaved. And so eventually she's able to get back and get back to the North, and her case goes before the federal court, and she is granted reparations because she had been snatched after she had already gotten her freedom in a northern state. And she's won the first case. This is 1871, I believe, is 1871, is that she wins in federal court. So black people have, and a woman, and that's one of the things I want to let your audience know, it's been black women always at the forefront of the reparations movement. You see a lot of black male faces on the movement now, but historically, to be accurate, black men have led the movement for reparations. So at this point in time, in this juncture, I'm not allowing black men or women to be off the hook for reparations. I mean, in support of Dr. King and his philosophy. I'll show you conclusively Dr. King is a reparationist. He supported reparations. We can prove that. But black women, and going back to her, she wins her case before an all-white jury. So we have what we call legal precedents. Going back to your initial question, we have legal precedents for reparations. And then too, all the cases after that point in time, the native people have been given reparations. Part of them being on reservations, them owning casinos and land, that was based on treaties of the 1800s. So we have precedents to establish reparations. But because of the disrespect, the dislike, and the hatred of black people, segments of the white ruling class and scared to death Negroes consider reparations. But again, let their power base start to be ill-affected. Their profit base, their policy base, and their privilege base, they will finally come to the table on reparations. But there is historic precedence for it. And again, that is, again, too, that was the tort model now. She did win in court. And because the statute of limitation has not been passed her, so she was there as a witness, and she was able to call witnesses to the stand to verify her story. So she was compensated. She only got $2,500, in which in turn would be about $65,000 that she got for reparations. That was a significant amount of money back then. So we do have legal precedent for reparations, but that was what we call the tort model. Tort is a wrong or a legal term for a wrong or an injury.
And she actually initially filed, because this was actually her second try at filing a case where she was asking for $20,000, and the all-white jury only awarded her $2,500 for 16 years of unlawful enslavement. But there's something that came out of this story that was interesting to me as well, and it wasn't to eclipse our dear sister Henrietta Wood's story, but I thought it was something that speaks to this last point that I would love for us to discuss regarding reparations, and that is as we continue on into Jim Crow and mass incarceration. But I want to talk about the guy who actually came to arrange or orchestrate her kidnapping out of Cincinnati, Ohio, was a man by the name of Zebulon Ward. And Zebulon Ward was the deputy sheriff in Kentucky. In Kentucky. And what's interesting is that at the same time of him, the first time that Henrietta Wood filed her first claim of unlawful enslavement, Mr. Ward was actually appointed what was known as the keeper of the Kentucky State Prison. And during that time, they were not given a salary. Instead, they were given the opportunity to arrange the labor of those who were incarcerated to produce products. Now, what kind of products? And it's important that we listen to this, because when we don't know history, we are doomed to repeat it. So he was permitted to have those who were incarcerated weave hemp bags, pick cotton, and lay rail for the railroad system, right? a percentage of the profits from these industries that he was able to participate in using free labor from those who were incarcerated went to him, right? As a result of him using that free labor and getting a percentage of that profit, he became one of the most successful and influential people of his time in Kentucky. He went on to a few other prisons where he continued to amass his wealth. And believe it or not, he became one of the founding members because he took some of his wealth and he began investing in breeding horses. And he became one of the foundationary members of what? The Kentucky Derby. So when we talk about the legacy of slavery and the fact that they are benefiting from things that were laid out in the 1800s, right? What do we have today? Well, back then, putting incarcerated persons to work, the privatization of prisons today got its start in what was called convict leasing, right? We're doing the same thing. This is a part of the continuation of slavery. So, Professor Muhammad, using Sister Henrietta Wood and Zebulon Ward as this example that I just highlighted, can we expand on this reparations conversation in addition to slavery to include things like Jim Crow and now mass incarceration? And how does that play its part into the policies that we develop that help to heal the trauma and the experiences of today, of 2020 and beyond?
Well, historically, let's and you speak of the prison industrial complex, what we know it is today. But remember, policing in America and those prisons were to deal with those who had run away and escaped the plantations. So what we know, Professor Karriemah, is that, think about it like this. When we start talking about plantations in the country, there are four entities or bodies that owe Black people. There is the federal government, there are multinational corporations, there are institutions that owe us, and then there are plantation owners that owe us. So there's at least four bodies and entities that owe us. In America, I'm talking about, because the international piece, we'll get to that later. But again, we're talking about the federal government, they're complicit, multinational corporations, institutions, nonprofit or profitable institutions, and the plantation owners. And remember today, to your audience, there are still over 40,000 plantations that we can directly relate and tie to slavery that are still in existence today in America. They made their fortunes because they owned slaves. And every state and city that owe us here, when we say government, we're not just talking about the federal government, but the state and local governments, because what they did, even after Black people were released from slavery, they had what we call sharecropping. And the other thing is that if you were caught or convicted of anything, just like gathering on a public street, reckless eyeballing of white people, carrying a book or a newspaper, you could be incarcerated. And then what they did at the local level, and Georgia was very much known for this, is that they would lease out, the city jails would lease out these convicts from the prison, the city jail, as well as the state jails. The prisons would lease out those convicts, the people that they were holding, to do work, do labor, and work the people for free. A lot of them died in Georgia prisons, in Florida, Mississippi prisons, working because they had gathered on the streets, or they didn't have for vagrancy laws and things like that, and they didn't have anywhere to go. So they were forced right back into a system of slavery, and we saw that with the prisons. So Michelle Alexander, New York Times bestseller, The New Jim Crow. She breaks that down and documents that too. But that makes a strong case for reparations. That proves too that we still have records. We know who owe us. We know who, what, when, why they owe us based on the documentation that's still there. So don't let anybody tell you, well, it happened so long ago, the records are not there. See, they can find the records for atrocities for everybody else except for Black people in America. So this is why we don't let them off the hook. And now the DNA, you talked about, you raised the question, and I didn't elaborate on it. Well, the study is called epigenetics. Epigenetics. Well, in the study of epigenetics, their major medical institutions, colleges, and universities are looking at that the fact that in the DNA and even in the psyche, those who have experienced trauma, they've passed it down from one generation to the other. Well, what about Black people in America? Here you're talking about the people who for centuries who have been terrorized, tortured, tormented, and tortured, colonized, castrated, chemicalized, and criminalized for centuries. What in the DNA is in our DNA is a level of fear from the trauma that we have suffered. We pass that on down from one generation to the other. Prove that, Reginald. Go back and look at Frances Cress Welch in 1972. She wrote a book in the 90s called The ISIS Paper. Well, in that book, there is a article that she deals with. The fact is that Blacks live under, and they transfer that level of fear from generation to generation. Now, these are scientific studies. Long before they put the term on epigenetic, Dr. Frances Cress Welch had looked at that. We had passed that fear and that trauma down from one generation to the other. I'm going to prove that right now. I lived in Los Angeles, California for 13 years. Not on the outskirts of Los Angeles, but in the heart of the city, South Central LA. The young brothers sometimes in the so-called gangs will come in and terrorize the neighborhood and shoot up the neighborhood, got everybody on lockdown and afraid. I've seen this 2 or 3 times where one white officer or 2 white officers jump out of the car and 8 or 9 of them are strapped and they automatically lay down on the ground. What causes are now, I'm not just talking about the youth. Now, what causes Black people to have what the boys call the double consciousness? When we're among European people and working and socializing around them, we put on a certain air and a certain behavior that we will utilize. And when we come to the Black community, we have another way we approach and how we deal with each other. Some of it is culture, but some of it is fear. A lot of times we give white people some of our best service out of the fear of not wanting to anger them or incense them. So give an example. Look at Black men who stand around while women are being beaten or killed, and we got our damn phones out as opposed to defending our men, women, and children. That's a level of fear, because no self-respecting people who are self-respecting, self-defining, and self-developed will stand around and watch their children be killed or their women be beat, and the only thing they got is a damn cell phone out saying they're recording it. See, self-respecting people don't do that. But because of the level of fear, and let me prove it, historically, they have known this. Go read the book, The Peculiar Institution of Slavery by Kenneth Stamp. You hear Dr. King quoting from the book all the time. Well, in The Peculiar Institution of Slavery, Kenneth Stamp has a whole chapter, Professor Karriemah, probably 30 pages in that chapter, and it's entitled, Make Them Stand in Fear. So what he realizes that the plantation owners, this is not the Willie Lynch letter now. I'm talking about a book that they use in academic institutions all the time, historically and psychologically. Well, they showed that Black people were on the plantation. They were beaten so bad and killed and murdered, it put fear in the other slaves. So give an example. When you see Black mothers and fathers after their sons and daughters have been killed by white police officers say, well, you know, I forgive them. Some of that is a level of fear. Because think about it like this. Here we at the church where this boy goes in, Dylan Ruth, There are 9 black parishioners in the church in South Carolina a few years back. Goes in and they allow him to sit among him. They don't even question him. He comes in with a backpack. But because of their fear, they don't do that. Now, if Pookie and Ray Ray or Shanae had walked in with a backpack, well, we got to check that backpack. What are you doing here? We never seen you before. But because of the white man, we had not seen him before, and because of our fear, we didn't even question him. And then, too, the other thing about that incident in South Carolina, in Charlotte, he gets up and gets to the backpack and starts shooting, possibly him to kill 2 people. But the men should have killed him in that instance. There should have been some men there and some women there to get to him, have killed him before the police officers got there. Now, he may have gotten 1 or 2 people, but 9 people, he shouldn't have been able to kill all 9 people in a setting like that. Then we didn't enough people who were self-respecting, self-defining, and self-defending, he should have been killed. But because a level of fear, there were people who hesitated and didn't do anything about it. Now,
and we can't forget the fact that he left a little girl that he did not shoot, and he said, "I'm keeping you alive as a witness," therefore reinforcing this epigenetics or this trauma that we're passing down, reinforcing it for that little girl.
Exactly. Absolutely. But think about the engram that she has now. The engram that she has that in her subconscious mind, that it's going to always, she will never, unless she gets some healing, then it's going to be, and Allah intervenes, then it's going to be hard for her to deal with that. And I'm suggesting to why reparations is so important. If we don't ever deal with the trauma, because one part of that reparations package that we're asking for to the audience is that, to the whole BBI audience, is that we got to get some counseling and some therapy for the trauma that we have suffered as a people. Because no people have been so traumatized, terrorized, tortured, and tormented like Black people in America. So that's why reparations is so important. Give an example. If we say that the Black family is the problem, teenage pregnancy is the problem, alcohol is the problem, lack of finance is the problem, ignorance, high school dropout, that's why Black people can't get ahead. No, I'm suggesting to you though, those are the results of our problem. Those are not the problems of Black people. Those are the results of the problem. So we got to go back and deal with the problem. It would be like you, one of the sisters saying, okay, I'm about to be married, and she's been in 2 or 3 abusive relationships. And then the next brother that comes along is not abusive. He is not egotistical. He's not demeaning to her. He's not abusing her physically or mentally or psychologically or emotionally or verbally. He's not doing any of this. But she has not been healed from those past relationships. How can we blame her if she does not go into that new relationship and does not function, and the family is able to function if we have not dealt with some therapy and counseling that is needed to repair some of the damage that has been done? And that's Black people in America. The damage has been done. And let me prove, I call it, it's not just Black fear, but the term, we're doing a position paper. For those who don't know what a position paper is where you look at the research and you study and observe and gather the empirical data as well as the research, and you formalize a position. Well, my position is that Black people suffer from caucophobia. That is the collective fear or intimidation of European people. Caucophobia, the collective fear or intimidation of European people, or those who classify themselves as Caucasian, white, Aryan, or Jewish. Let me prove the caucophobia. President Obama. I'm not just picking on brothers or sisters or brothers. I'm giving you examples of people who suffer from caucophobia. Right. President Obama said in 2010 that the National Defense Authorization Act was possibly unconstitutional or illegal. And he said that he would pass because the National Defense Authorization Act allows that a U.S. citizen can be detained at any time without legal representation in an undisclosed location. It goes where the Patriot Act does not go. President Obama said that the legislation was bad legislation, and that he thought it was parts of it was possibly unconstitutional. And he publicly said these things. And I'm not quoting him, but I'm telling you, I'm paraphrasing some of his thoughts about the National Defense Authorization Act. Well, in December of 2011, he signs the National Defense Authorization Act anyway. Why? You have to ask, what was he afraid of? What did they promise him? Or what did they threaten him with? Colin Powell, a 4-star general, and I'm not hating on the military. I'm a former military person myself. 4-star general. He disagreed with the Bush administration about the invasion of Iraq and whether they had nuclear weapons. He's arguing with Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush and all of them. And at the end of the day, they give him the paperwork and walk him and make him go before the United Nations and tell a lie and really embarrass himself and his credibility which he had as a military person. From that context, he had a stellar career. Now, there's some contradictions, we know, but at the end of the day, his inability to tell George Bush, Rumsfeld, and Cheney, this is I'm not going to do this because I disagree with you all. But at the end of the day, suffering from claustrophobia, he could not tell the white man to go to hell. Now, how you know black people suffer from claustrophobia? The inability to critique white folks, the white ruling class, critique them, condemn them, or criticize them, or tell them to go to hell. We do that with each other all day, every day. But when you see black people in high places, in big places, and they can't critique and condemn European people, you know they suffer from claustrophobia. Here in Atlanta, the mayor, Kasim Reed, think about this. He didn't have the ability to tell Arthur Blank, who owns the Falcons, look here, wait a minute. I'm going to give a billionaire billions of the taxpayers' dollars to build a stadium. Arthur Blank told him and the black churches, they tore down 2 black churches to build a football stadium. And these Negroes, if my records serve me correctly, they ain't had a winning season yet since they tore down the 2 black churches and built the football stadium. But they had Kasim Reed, the mayor, and black parishioners and black politicians go along with this. Tell me in the United States where we could have gone and tore down one synagogue or one Catholic church and said, we got black billionaires, we about to build a football stadium. They would have told you to go to hell.
Right.
But we can't do that. That's how you know when we suffer from claustrophobia, because we're very critical of each other. We can critique each other all day. We can condemn each other all day. But when it comes to the white ruling class, we don't do that. It's just like Joe Biden. We got our people, this is still reparations. Biden has been historically against reparations. Your audience, if they want me to, I can send them an op-ed that I wrote that appeared online condemning Biden and Sanders for their non-support of black reparations. That's been an historic struggle with Biden and Sanders. I'm not just saying that to cast doubt on them for those of y'all who want to support him as a president, but he's been an activist against reparations for blacks in America. But he's supported millions of dollars in reparations for others. And there are blacks right now who cannot condemn Joe Biden and tell him, look here, this is what we're critiquing about. And if you want to be the president of the United States, we need you to not only talk about support the study of reparation, but you're going to actually push in public policy that we get reparations. So that's a different issue then. And so Joe Biden, some of your best white liberals, they're not in support of reparations. Excuse me. We're into some other
No. I appreciate that, and I'm sure the audience does too. But we're about to wrap things up, and I just want to, this is the Black Business Influencer, BBI Talks. That's what the BBI stands for. And so we're not just talking about for-profit endeavors or money-making endeavors, and that being Black business exclusively, but we're also talking about Black business, like our affairs, Absolutely. Right? Yes. But I want to talk about reparations as it relates to its impact specifically on our money-making endeavors, on Black businesses. How can Black businesses benefit from a form of reparations? Obviously, Brother Ice Cube has been championing the contract with Black America. And he kind of addresses having a different banking crediting structure for Black business owners, but in the context of reparations, and this will be the final question before we wrap up, how can what could reparations look like for Black business owners?
Well, thank you, a very good question. We have a national declaration that we're working on, and what's key about the National Reparations Declaration, we're spelling out how many trillions of dollars that they owe us. And complete reparations, my sister, into the audience, is that there is a component that will address Black businesses. Give an example. We need a minimum of 10 banks nationwide for Black people. You're talking about over $1 trillion of spendable income. You're talking about over 45 million Blacks in America. So we, in proportion to the population, we need a minimum of 10 banks. We're talking about online banks and physical banks that are nationwide. So we're not talking 1 or 2 banks. We need at least a minimum of 10 banks. The best position that we're in, if we end up with about 25 banks and investment houses, credit unions, and again, where they would be able to lend. Dr. King talked about what was needed back in '63. And Dr. King is for reparations. He said that the inner cities, Black businesses, to overcome the poverty and to reinvest in our communities and in our businesses, we need a minimum of $50 billion in 1963. One of the things that we're putting together, because I have been very critical of the reparations movement, saying that you lack a model and a methodology. Well, in the declaration, we're spelling out, and so far, Professor Karriemah, we have come up with a minimum, a starting point of $70.2 trillion. And somebody said to me the other day, they ain't finna give y'all no $70 trillion, because that will close the wealth gap. That will allow us to build our own institutions for education. That will allow us to invest in manufacturing, importing and exporting. That's where my sister and family, that's what we're missing as it relates to business. But we answer that in the declaration, and inshallah, the declaration will be out in the up and coming weeks for the public to view. We got scholars working on it, economists and others developing that reparation. But so far, we're talking about, you're talking about Black businesses, they will get a portion of that $10 trillion. It's $70 trillion for the entire reparations package, which include land, which include equipment, it includes goods and services, and then too, the United States has a certain amount of gold, so it ain't gonna all be dollars. And then too, we need this over the next 25 years. So if America, and if you divide $70 trillion, you can see how this is manageable over a 20 to 25 year period that we're asking for reparations. And at the end of the day, but again, in the package, back to your question, it will address the need for importing and exporting, investments, real estate, major real estate acquisition, commercial as well as residential. This is when you'll see Blacks transform them complete reparations. And the tragedy is, if we don't get a complete reparations package, we'll be around here 20, 30 years still talking, marching for jobs and justice. But the reparations package, and a complete reparations package, not talking about what they're doing in California, not talking about what they're doing in Illinois, a complete reparations package where the government has given us what they owe us, a portion of what they owe us, the multinational corporations, the institutions, and the plantation owners that are still around. When they give us what they owe us, then, my sister, we won't have any excuse about why we're not getting up doing for self, because we would have the skill, we would have the resources and the equipment and the man and the brain power to transform our lives and then be strategically fit and successful for the remainder of the 21st century.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so very much, Professor Reginald Muhammad.
to some of that question?
Oh, yes. Yes, you did, big brother, and covered quite a bit of territory for us. We couldn't get to all the questions. Look, family, we couldn't answer all these questions in one sitting. So we definitely have to ask you, dear brother, if you can please come back at a later date and time so that we can pick this conversation up, because we can never have this conversation too much. Some of the things that were asked relate to leadership. You know, who have we identified in leadership that's going to present this? That was something that moving forward we will have to address. Based upon your 4-point model, will President Trump, who has stated that he's going to hold the stimulus package until after the election, do you believe, based upon your 4-point model, that that is the case? And we don't want you to answer now. We want people to come back to the next conversation so that they can get those answers. But I thank you, dear brother, for joining us. This, like I said, I've learned so much from this conversation, and I'm sure those who are watching via Facebook, YouTube, as well as Instagram. We lost our Instagram, unfortunately. Look, another one bites the dust. The battery went dead on the phone. But we'll be sure to edit this up. And of course, you can check out this particular interview in its totality on Spotify. We are now available. BBI Talks is now available on Spotify, as well as the video interview that you're watching now. The full link will be made available on Facebook. So please, I'm asking you, share this with your friends, share it with your family members, have that dialogue within your family and among your friends, and let's come to a consensus. But it starts by one individual extending the conversation to another, and we build like that. My final comments is actually based upon what our ancestors wanted, and I believe that what they wanted for us should be a part of what we want for ourselves. And so in a book that I quoted a little earlier, I want to share with everyone who is watching as my concluding thoughts, a situation that was highlighted in the book entitled Repair, Redeeming the Promise of Abolition. And it goes like this. Formerly enslaved asked for reparations in Port Royal, South Carolina, Beaufort, before Northern troops arrived in 1861. Upon arrival, they emancipated the enslaved Africans by military occupation. The occupying military officials asked, quote, "What would freedom mean to you?" The formerly enslaved Africans responded with the following: "We want land. Land. This land belongs to us. Our parents are buried here. Our grandparents are buried here. Our blood is in this soil. And we want you to go away. We want to build new free lives, heal ourselves as a people, as a Black community, without white people overseeing what our lives look like." Those are my final thoughts for today. This is your Professor Karriemah Lotus with Professor Reginald Muhammad on BBI Talks. Thank you for joining us. Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.